Hi everyone. Today we're going to be doing the half-inch rigid conduit threading lab. So you're going to need a few things to get started, but before you get started, make sure you have your safety glasses. Very important to have your safety glasses, your safety shoes and everything on. And also make sure that you have a rag with you or a towel or something, because it does get a little bit oily when you're threading conduit. Also, you're going to need your Sharpie and a tape measure, and you're going to need your threading tools to complete this lab. So first thing we want to do is we're going to want to cut off a piece of conduit, and for your lab you're going to need a 16-inch piece of conduit. So we're going to take our tape measure and our Sharpie, and we're going to mark out 16 inches onto our steel rigid conduit. And we're going to get out our cutters. So our cutters here have a couple wheels on here to guide you around your pipe, around your conduit, and we also have a cutting wheel on here. This cutting wheel, you want to line that up on your mark with your Sharpie. So we're going to line that up, just snug the cutter up, not too tight, and then as we go, we want to go around this way, and every time we go around, we just want to give it about a quarter of a turn tighter, and we're just going to keep working it around until we get it cut off. Don't turn it too tight, you'll damage the cutting wheel. It shouldn't turn that hard. And we'll just keep working it until we get it cut off. It's just about there. And there we go. I'm going to put that down. So there's our 16-inch piece of conduit. When we cut this and we use that cutter, it puts a big ridge on inside this piece of conduit on both ends. Has a big ridge in there. We're going to have to get rid of that. So let's get this piece out that we don't need. Here, we'll set that aside, and then we're going to put our piece that we're working with into our vise. We want it sticking out here, probably, I'm going to say at least 8 inches or so, about halfway of your conduit. Make sure it's in there nice and tight so it doesn't turn. Make sure it's gripped in there really well. So then we're going to take out this edge that we talked about here, this sharp edge. When we drop wire into our conduit, we don't want that sharp edge. So we have a reamer here, and we're going to take and ream that ridge off of inside that conduit. And again, it's ratcheted, so you just shove it on there. You don't have to push too hard. Make sure your oil bucket's underneath there. We want to catch all those shards in that bucket. And we'll just check it. And I think I got it. We got this edge off of there. We want to make sure that it's off and that it's not going to damage our conductor when we're going to put it in. So once we've got that done, then we can get our threader out. So our threader on it has an arrow on there. This is the direction that this ratchet's going to work, and it's going to turn our threader on or off. So we have to make sure we're going in the right direction. So we're going to put it on there, and again, we want to cut in a clockwise motion, so my arrow needs to be facing that way. So we're all set, and it's probably good that if you have a rag or a set of gloves, and you're going to need to push on the end of this cutter a little bit to get it started. Once you feel it starting to grip, that's going to start cutting. So once we get it started to cut, we're gonna put a little oil on that. So make sure our bucket's underneath. So again, it's catching our shards. And we're gonna put some oil on here. This is cutting oil. It's a special oil designed for cutting threads. And once it starts to grab, we don't need to push on it. It'll work its way on. And we're going to keep threading this until our conduit comes to the end of our die, to the end of our cutters. In a moment here, we'll see if we can get the camera to get in a little closer here, zoom it in a bit to see where we need to stop. We need to cut these threads, and in table 43 in your code book tells you how long that thread has to be for each size of conduit. So in here, our conduit needs to come to the end of our cutters, which is right about there right now. I think I met that by doing that. By cutting further, you start making running threads. And running threads are not permissible. And if you have running threads, you go further, your couplings and your connectors and your fittings that you have to put on the end of this conduit will not tighten up. So running threads, it's not a good thing. It's not good electrical practice. We'll never tighten up our fittings properly. It's too much. So once you've got it cut as far as you need it to be cut, you got your between 16 and 19 millimeters for half-inch conduit. We're going to turn our dies the other way, and then we can just start to spin it off. Once we get it started, we can just turn it off by hand. Say if you had a pair of gloves or a rag, you got to watch the shards and stuff and cuttings in our threader, and we don't want that in our hands. So again, we just tap the threads out a little bit, or the cuttings out a little bit, and then that should be our conduit threaded. We also want to make sure that we don't have any of those pieces left inside our conduit, because when we draw our conductors in there, those little sharp filings and cuttings in there will damage our wire and cause us some problems. So there's our conduit. You need to thread both ends for your lab. I'm going to just demonstrate a pair of electrical cutters that I have, a set of electric dies that get used on the job site that you might run into. So I'm going to just turn my pipe around here, or my conduit around. I'm going to tighten it up in there. And I'm going to get out my electric set. On these ones here, I got a clamp that I have to put on there to hold my cutter. So I'm going to have my piece on there. The same type of die as we have in our handheld ones. Again, we want to put a little oil on there, just a little bit of cutting oil. Again, we want to make sure that we have lots of oil on this, cutting oil on this. It keeps us from damaging our dies. Now I can reverse that off. Definitely much quicker and easier with this set here. But there's a lot of companies that don't have that. If you don't do a lot of conduit threading and stuff, they'll have a hand set of dies, hand set of tools to use. I didn't clean up the sharp edge here, which I should do, but just to give you a little idea of how a pair of electric tools will work. They're both rigid tools and they both work very well.